Well, hello. Good to see you. Good to see you.
It's good to see you. You don't have a smoking backdrop.
Now, this
That's
is
a very nice buck rub.
pre-fire. This is up at what's called the Needles Lookout in the Sierra
Okay.
Nevadas. And so, a couple of years ago, this place actually the lookout burned up in a fire. And so, one of our fires nearby started in this area in a place called Ponderosa, and it's spread pretty far so far. But recently, when we went away on a holiday, this is where we went. I took a hike up here, so I had that picture. But our skies definitely don't look like that right now.
Yeah, and I've heard from my son that all the smoke is headed to Canada, lower mainland BC.
We just continue gifting Canada with greater stuff, right?
Well, I agree.
Amen.
There's COVID concerns, but smoke can cross borders. So
Smoking.
it's smoking.
We don't have air quality quite as bad as my friends in Oregon and Washington.
Right.
We're pretty bad air quality. Feel the effects of it, and kind of funny the way that it works.
Yeah. I don't think Lynn is joining us, and I don't know about. Yes, John is joining us. I heard that. So.
All right. Well, hey, let's do. You know what? I'm gonna skip the check-in. How are you doing? Not because I don't care how you're doing, but because since we've got the strategic huddle, I'm assuming quite a bit of stuff to dig into. Let's just prioritize that. And so I'll hand it over to you guys. Decide how you want to present, but I'd love to be able to just hear about the SWOT analysis. You don't have to go through every minor detail of it, but I'd like to kind of hear that framework on the front end of where you guys were thinking. And then I'd like to see what the strategic plans were on the other side. And then we can go from there and kind of work out some stuff. Maybe if there's any key questions you already have, or maybe some things that I can push a little bit further into.
Yeah. So should I share screen here? Is that appropriate?
That'd be great.
Yeah. So I did send this to you, Michael, in the last few moments, and I apologize for not getting it sooner, but here's what it is. And yeah, so we started out with the SWOT, right? We did this pre-conference. So it was kind of an assignment before we did the virtual thing. We were doing this pre-conference. And so these are some of the things we came up with. I don't know if you want me to read through them. And I don't have to do this. Well, I'll do this one and then somebody else can do the next one. How about that?
Yeah, maybe if you could walk me through a category. So I'm starting in weakness. I've been reading through that, but maybe walk me through a category. Give me a little bit of context if there's any that you feel like you can provide. And if I've got any questions in that, that'll give me a chance to voice those.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll just start with frustration. Basically not participating in a missional community. We're just not there. We don't have modeling right now for us as we've been going through this. So that's frustration. Now our question was, sorry, I should go back. How is EMCC doing at disciple making? That was the focus question we were looking at. And again, probably each of us came at that with a focus on our regions where we're working. And so, but these are some of the things that came out. Frustration. There's a lack of next generation leaders, and I would say those both in pastoral positions and even some coming up in laity that are involved in that disciple making process. Okay. Bandwidth, there's limited time, and we're talking about everybody with COVID. My goodness, there's so much going on. So what's the capacity? at this time. Um, there's a definite tendency for those who have been somewhat exposed to this, not necessarily in the huddles, but maybe have had slight exposure to disciple making way of Jesus, that they tend to go innovation rather than having imitation, which is what we did for 10 years. So I guess we modeled that well. And then the value of multiplication is not shared. It's kind of, so how can we do this within our local body, maybe sometimes, rather than multiplying that beyond that. So I could just stop there, and maybe you want to comment.
Great. So let me ask about this. So with the next gen leaders, you guys have access to the senior pastors. Is it appropriate and right that you might have access directly as RPs to second tier and third tier leaders at congregations?
For sure.
Okay. Do you guys have that roster even?
Oh, yes.
And have those folks been invited into the huddles so far, or did you focus primarily on lead pastors? And
go ahead.
Yeah, so I went a little bit different at this, and so Carter and Nathan, right? So those are both second seat younger guys, and the other huddle I'm doing are all youth pastors. Nice. And one's in his 20s now, in his 30s, and the other one's late 40s.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, I would have the same thing. Half of mine would be next gen leaders. In fact, depending on how you define next gen leaders, even my senior leaders are first time leaders and they're next gen. So I wasn't in the room for this one, Brian. I would say that we actually have more traction than we think. Okay. And we have a next generation group that Curvin had formed. And the goal was to get Grover to huddle them. So again, if that didn't happen, but with that intent, it's just probably, I guess it still fits frustration though.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say that all of the ones that I am huddling are lead or solo pastors. It's not that they're, well, I would not have the 20-somethings or even 30-somethings in my groupings at the moment. So that's certainly where I'm coming from.
I think this was Nathaniel's statement, right? Nathaniel, like this is, if I remember correctly, it was you who brought this up, especially among the Asian churches, that there's really a lack of younger leaders there. Is that correct?
Yeah, for younger leaders, yes, but only yesterday for the body's information is that together with one of the most senior pastor, I have decided to go for the next gen huddle. And that will be with the associate pastors, we call it. Because right now we are just doing the huddle with the lead pastors of our Chinese churches.
No.
But coming months, we will start with the associate pastor, and I will be the one leading.
Great.
Okay, so it looks like we're making some progress here,
Yeah.
even from last week. Yeah.
How about take us into the battles?
Yeah, so the battles is there a complete buy-in from huddle people? By that we mean, so is there that multiplication process happening from these people that we're having in huddles? Some are doing it, some need more work. I would say my second group that I started a couple of years after my first group is multiplying, but my second year, they don't have this. They don't have it there yet. So I'm working through a second year with them, explaining small group and huddle. So there's, I think I don't know who brought this one up, but I think there's a misunderstanding and a misdefinition of what this huddle thing is. Or sometimes I'm using the word disciple making cell. as well. So there's confusion on that. There's the COVID distraction bandwidth. I think that's a similar thing we talked about. What models of disciple making are reproducing? That's a question, because we have churches that may not be using Way of Jesus or 3DM. They might be using other disciple making approaches. So here's the question: what's actually reproducing? And then lost momentum with some of the Way of Jesus culture and language. And all that means is, I think this is also a before COVID stuff, but even with our journey in the last year, we might have lost some momentum, even though we're huddling people. Our regional gathering wasn't there. Some of the connections that we would have had for doing that, some of the momentum has been lagging. So I don't know if anybody has something to add to that, but that's my.
That's good for that one. I think I get each one of those. Again, makes sense that in a sense COVID is showing up on both sides of it too, because that's definitely internal and external stuff we've all been facing. All right, take us to the weaknesses.
Want me to do that, Brian?
Oh yeah, if you want to do the failures or the go ahead.
I'm sorry, the
weaknesses or the failures. Bottom left. So again, that family on mission or missional communities isn't happening. That kind of stated that twice. Doing leadership, pastor huddle, but not making new disciples. In other words, the disciple making that we're doing is primarily with pastors. At this point, we ourselves aren't really got something happening in our own neighborhoods where we've led people to Christ and are discipling them in our own neighborhood. So that's not role modeling what we believe is the ideal. Toolbox is not complete. Some of the resources and stuff that we're trying to build or borrow or steal from 3DM or from whoever. Yeah. But we got some more pieces, like we certainly have some, but we haven't consolidated that and agreed on that for what we will use going forward. And then just in reality, we are multicultural, got a number of other languages, and we've done very little translation of our resources, Way of Jesus statements, etc., into native languages that we have people groups in.
How many other people?
Or modeling for that matter.
Yeah. Well, Nathaniel's doing a little bit now with the Asian churches, so. But our Tamil or East Indian or Quebecois. African, yeah.
Okay. Is Way of Jesus language familiar to them because that's been in your guys' DNA for a while, or is it not?
With the ethnic churches?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, we've certainly been using that, and they would, I mean, they're all English, like they can all speak English. So they'd be somewhat familiar, but how embedded? John, would you say, like, what about the Tamil churches?
I think it's got its footing. Can I use that word?
Yeah.
I think we've all spoken, and President Phil earlier on was really, we've done trainings in their context. So, but again, it's not necessarily not only translated, but actually beyond just the words, translated actually that it works in their cultural settings too.
Yeah.
A little bit of contextualizing is still part of it.
Okay, that's good. And then I'm curious about the toolbox not being completed. What do you guys feel like is the weakness and threat that has hindered that from being finalized?
Well, some of that was falling on me as a point person to lead that. So there's a bit of bandwidth, lots of other things going on at the same time. it was somewhat premature because we're in this process. What are the tools that we're learning in vehicles from 3DM, for instance? So now that we're kind of finished there 2 years, you know, it's an opportunity. So there's certainly along the way we have been saying, okay, here's, well, even just after this 5th immersion, you know, our debrief was, okay, which one of these tools, you know, that they use there are stickable, are helpful, you know, so we've been doing that along the way. And so some things we intentionally are grabbing a hold of and are choosing to use as regional ministers, and others maybe not so much.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
I would add to that. I think we're probably doing better on this than we maybe have this as a failure, because we do have a scope and sequence.
Yeah.
For Huddle. I think part of this is guidebook as a resource that can be placed into the hands of, you know, somebody else. We've just been lagging on this for years, and again, things have changed over the past 2 years too. So anyway.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad we didn't have it from then, right? Like, because now I would feel we're better equipped now to. Still don't think I'm fully knowing what I'm doing, but at least I'm more conscious of what I'm trying to do.
A suggestion there, I know I might be jumping ahead, but a suggestion there is that I think, you know, the idea that it would be completed is probably, I get what you're trying to say, but, you know, inevitably your toolbox is always going to be open and adding new tools to it. And I do hear what you're stating. You've made decisions, there's been creation of stuff, but you need things that you can further resource people with. You want a way to be able to publish these resources and share these resources from the toolbox. Something that's worked for me has just been using the Zoom video and recording a quick teaching of me doing it in a very unprofessional way. Like, I'm not trying to model it perfectly. I'm not looking for the lead in on my video to be branded. I want it to feel raw and natural, like I'm just a regular guy, but using this tool. And what happens there is, one, you're modeling that this doesn't have to look and sound perfect, but you are giving a standard. Here's how we would recommend this being taught. And then you can share that one resource over and over again, post it onto YouTube and share it there. And so that's what I've done then, going back to my scope and sequence. Each one of the tools that I am teaching, I've tried to make videos for each one of those so that I can always just reach into the toolbox and share that. And when I'm asking somebody to model it for me the next huddle, I say, hey, I know you saw it earlier when I did it, but here's the video. And all of that, again, I think the unprofessional part is the critical piece. And that maybe that's what I would encourage you in. Sure, there might be a spot where pamphlets and books literally are published, but it does feel a little bit premature there. Get it out in the water, test it, let people play with it, let it be further refined. And developing videos like that could be helpful. I could show you an example. I'm sure you've probably seen one from me inevitably, but
Yeah, I think we have. Yeah, that'd be good.
the landscape of life. I think I did one for that because I started teaching that all the time, and I needed a standard to be referred back to.
Well, that's encouraging, even the sense of the not professional, because there's a bit of hesitancy to start actually doing something, because, you know, it's got to have the spit and polish, right? But this is kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah, and I think there's grace for it. Everybody's used to Zoom now. So COVID, this is another, I think, advancement because of COVID. Everybody's used to it. And then just tell people like, hey, this is, you know, we're not trying to have a polished version of it, but this is some really important content that we know we want to have shared across the movement of the denomination. So
that would have to be an RM type of resource, because I think in our other areas, our communication people would want excellence. So I think it's a different angle on it, which I like, again, thinking that through.
Yeah, and see, that's great. So here's what's happening as I'm taking what I'm doing at a regional minister level. I've just created those videos for my own people, and I share it, and I use it outside of my region too. But now that we're playing with taking my scope and sequence at a national level, what I'm stating is each one of those that was poorly done now needs to be branded so that it's got the national, like, you know, spit and polish that it needs to have. And so when we go through that next iteration, they will be much more professionally done. But for 2.5 years, those unprofessional videos have been very, very helpful for me. And then it's helped me to realize, wow, I don't have one on the square. Do I really need one? You know, so I'm surprised at what I ended up using regularly. That's what drove the creation of that content. What do I regularly need? And I wish I just had a go-to resource for it.
So which ones, can we ask which ones did you do, or can you just spit that off from memory, or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the ones that I'm remembering, of course, circle, triangle, those are keys and basic. I'm, again, surprised that I didn't use square, because usually those three are the critical pieces. That might be what you guys are getting at with multiplication too. That's the multiplication tool right there.
Yeah.
Semicircle is one of them. The person of peace tool. And so I teach it not as the octagon, I teach it as the person of peace strategy. That's the way that the latest iteration from Mike in his book comes across. I've got landscape of life. And I think I've got a 5 capitals video, because that tends to come out not as a primary tool, but when I'm in a coaching consulting time and you're really breaking something down, that's something that I might send to like somebody one-off, that I want them to have the content delivered in a, you know, a decent way. Those seem like the basic ones. I'm sure there's more. Oh yeah, covenant and kingdom triangles. I've got that in there. That's an incredibly basic concept. I'd have to go back, but I could show you even all of the videos that I've got that way.
Great.
And then here, let me just so in content development and toolbox development, you know, right now I'm piloting my year 2 coaching framework, and I'm learning a ton while I go through it. So I came to it resourced with quite a bit, but now I'm learning where my gaps are, and I need to develop some more simple videos to teach things like, you know, for us, we're focusing in on holiness. So this is very denomination oriented language, and we're focusing on divine healing. And so I'm probably going to want to create some little kind of like densely packed teaching that won't be probably shape oriented, but will help be like a marker and a milestone that will be for ongoing future iterations. Because in the year 2, you know, especially when I'm playing with new content that's not 3DM specific, so it's not coming already, you know, developed and defined, you know, to a large degree, it's almost as if we're making up content together. And so I'm learning as I'm sharing some ideas, and it's growing with their input. So I want to make sure to capture that content so that I can, for the next group, not have to start from scratch. I can start from where we already began the conversation from. So that's some of the ideas I'm thinking of, and just the way that ongoing development of toolbox and toolkit are for me at least. All right.
And you have a 2-year scope and sequence, Michael, that you're using with people. You feel by then that should be enough, or you got it thinking of a 3rd year with some people, or what?
Yeah, I want to do 3rd and then even 4th year. So that's kind of where the square is coming into play. Year 1 is a lot of I do, you watch, though I'm giving them chances to play. Year 2, I'm noticing, is probably this combination of I do, you help, and you do. There's a lot more where I'm inviting their voice in, so I can feel the difference between L2 and L3. And so I'll really zero in on an L3 time frame, where I'm now going to want to equip them to lead their people. Because I'm saying that, I'm suggesting it, but I'm not holding them accountable to it. Year 3 will be, I want to see you infiltrate your network of people. I want to see you lead a huddle. And then year 4 will be like the fine tuning probably of like, okay, how do you actually do that? Because then I'm hoping they'll have some bruises and scrapes of their own, and I can coach from that standpoint, and it'll be a lot more of you do and I watch than anything else. So that's what you know, again, that's conceptual right now. Year 3 is kind of percolating in my head. That's coming because I've done, you know, over 2/3 of the way of year 2 now. And I can see okay, here's what the need is. Here's where I've got to push these people, because just asking them, hoping that they multiply isn't happening. I'm going to need to really hold them accountable. But what I've done is I've built trust, where now I've got loads of invitation with them, and I can maximize my challenge with them.
And your year, you say, is about 7 months.
I'd say probably more like 9, honestly.
Is it 9? Okay.
8 to 9. It's been funny too, even with COVID, like I'm fine. So my normal window would be March to November before Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving. That would be my window. That allows for holidays and all that kind of stuff. So there's a fluctuation in there. But I'm noticing that almost all of my huddles are getting pushed into the first and second week of December now, just because of whatever. Like today I got on a huddle and only one of the guys was able to make it. Oh, I'm sorry, I had this thing. And so just it keeps getting pushed out a little bit. I don't know if that's COVID related or just there's a Zoom fatigue, but I'm noticing, wow, okay, most of them are going first and second week of December now.
That's helpful.
All right, let's do breakthroughs.
So I guess I'll take that as well. Multiple models of disciple making in the EMC. So, you know, even though we don't just have a, Way of Jesus 3DM, so there is different ones using different models, and there are more pastors in huddles or some sort of disciple making environment. We now have real life examples of disciple making in 4th generation. Something that just got reiterated again just recently. Our national board is strongly prioritizing disciple making, and our team is all together on that as well. We feel it's a strength. We have had the Way of Jesus common language about making disciples who make disciples. There's some familiarity to that. There's some understanding, conscious awareness of disciple making, and so that's at least not starting from 0. And we are multiplying huddles, and RMs are being huddled, thanks to Michael Guzman. We've got some clarity now in our vehicles, which we didn't have as much clarity before. So we do, and even denominationally as a vehicle, we moved even the huddle is something that we do as a denomination from the bottom of the list of activities or events to the top of the list. So that's reprioritizing that. And then certainly we got a little bit of beginnings as a neighborhood family on mission. So not sure why that got such big print in there, but that maybe just happened. And then some of our pastor network groups are focusing on the Way of Jesus. So there's another way of embedding the Way of Jesus disciple making language and understanding, and push towards them seeking to make some cultural shift in their local church.
Yeah, that's good. I'm putting in the chat just a note here. I'm remembering again with Way of Jesus language and what I'm hearing in the breakthroughs, which is so amazing. You guys, I don't know if it's as easy to see the perspective from where you were, 2+ years ago to where this report is now. I mean, this is beautiful. There's so many big wins in here. And then knowing a lot more of the conversation, especially with what we came out of with that character and skills oriented conversation in the last 3 weeks. But this guy, John Mark Comer, I don't know him personally, but our general director is leaning into his. I mentioned to you guys that he's using Way of Jesus language for our denomination. That's kind of the thematic language for the whole year, and he'll continue to build out in it. What I'm learning from coming into contact with what Jim's leading out in and what John is stating is that John Mark Comer uses the Way of Jesus language, and he uses basically character and skills. That would be my language, our language. But he talks about being with Jesus and learning how do you be with Jesus. That's a lot more of like kind of character-oriented stuff. And then the other part is doing what Jesus did. And he uses that kind of relatively simple language for his church and all of the stuff that he's producing. And I was just realizing that might be helpful for what I'm watching you guys have on breakthrough here, to be able to harness the power of your breakthrough and lean into the areas where I know you guys want to see further growth, which is much more of the doing side of things. That was, seemed like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we were really, even Lynn was the one, I need to increase the challenge and push people to do the things of Jesus, which is more skills oriented than just simply being the people of Jesus, the character side of it. So I'm sure, yeah, again, I haven't read John Mark Comer stuff, but from what I'm getting through Jim, it seems very accessible. It seems translated already for the everyday disciple versus just for the pastors. And so it may be really helpful as a tool to be able to reinforce, one, the language you guys are already using, but that might help move from character to skills a little bit more intentionally. So I'll look to see what I can find about him. If there's a book, I did catch a video that populated when I just looked him up because I couldn't remember his full name. So I'll see what I can find for you guys.
Yeah. So I've been using kind of 3DM language of talking about the way of Jesus is, you know, being like Jesus and doing what he did, right? So I just shared that with one of our pastors that's been trained in E3, which is kind of a very strong evangelistic disciple making movement. And I just put that summary, you know, up on the whiteboard, and he just said that's it. I mean, that's exactly what we're about. You know, so like,
that's great.
Well, I guess we're trying to think about what's some ways of articulating some language that helps even some now that are in different disciple making focus. How can we, you know, establish some language, some statements that can pull us together, maybe a little bit more generic, not just way of Jesus language, but maybe a bit more disciple making biblical language. Well, I don't know, whatever, but trying to find common ground with some of these other groups.
Yeah, and I think that's a great idea, by the way. And something, especially if you've got groups that are, you know, they've got the ethos of disciple making and they're deploying some things and they're seeing some fruit. They're partners, not enemies. And so, finding the bridges between those could be really helpful. And again, you're going to probably find some sense of common language, just like what you described with the E3. And they're like, that's it. That's, you know, so every time you can gain that kind of ground, that's helpful. And then it's, you know, not about us winning or you winning. It's about us collectively, you know, taking the ground that way. So, you know, what's coming to mind is, and again, maybe I'm trying to solve a problem that you're not voicing today, but what I'm remembering again from 2-3 weeks ago was the idea that we have such strength in character, but we're not necessarily doing things in the skills area as strongly. And sometimes what happens is I've noticed that could be a blind spot. Like your pastors and churches may not even recognize that that's a weakness. So when you come to them and say, hey, by the way, your skills really suck, we need to work on that, you know, they don't respond well to that. So you've got to lead them through discovery. And so I could see where you would introduce, you know, hey, we've been playing with this way of Jesus language for X amount of years, and we're realizing that, man, we are really strong in this, and use being with Jesus and articulate that, you know, our people are this and our people are that, you know, build up loads of rapport. But then when we really look at doing what Jesus did, that's where the challenge comes into play. And I could see where you could lead people through a discovery process by, let's choose the Gospel of Mark, and let's just go through and find all of the actions. What does Jesus do? And let's brainstorm them onto a whiteboard and then just put them there. And let people populate that on its own. Because I notice that when I stare the scriptures back and realize this is what Jesus does, and here's what we do, like I'm blown away. And that can be the kairos that you can provoke by allowing them to see, here's what Jesus does in action. And do we even know how to do these things? And you're going to get into all kinds of nuanced conversations. Well, what about demonization for today? You know, what about healing and physical healing? And I think all of that is stuff that we've got to grapple with. And I could see where, even if you didn't grab hold of, we're going to learn how to, you know, exorcise demons. And as a denomination, it could be that you just identify, here's the one that keeps coming up when I bring these things up. You know, Jesus ate with people at the table all the time. And I don't even consider that part of my ministry strategy. That is a massive breakthrough. If I can just get that kairos to happen inside of a pastor versus me telling him that he should do that. So the leading and the discovery is a really, really critical part. And I could see where something like that exercise could be helpful for your folks.
Yeah, we did a exercise on consciousness and competence on mission plus message plus method plus miraculous equals movement.
Nice.
And we scored ourselves as incompetent in all those areas.
All of them.
Yeah, like not the team. Like we were evaluating generally our populace in the local church and
Okay.
in that field of things, and maybe included in that would be a number of our pastors, good number of our pastors.
Wow.
So that was kind of sobering for us.
Yep.
And only mission and message are really where we would feel that our people have a consciousness.
Yeah.
About that's what they're, the methods and the miraculous, would be a lot of ignorance. Well,
Wow.
Thanks, Brian, for putting that.
Yep. And now this from Speak Out, this seems to reinforce the things that we were discovering through going through Speak Out. That mission and message are strong. It's the DNA that has been in there for decades, since the beginnings of your denomination. But yep, there are some areas of method, miraculous, I could see where they're lacking in there. But again, you just want to take the next step, help people discover that. And I think exactly what you said, when you were forced to confront that was a sobering reality. That's kind of the kairos you want to provoke with your people when you say, here's the area we really want to grow into.
Michael, I think there's probably a lot of probably even pastors wouldn't even believe that they are to do what Jesus did.
Yep.
Character, they did, again, we come out of a holiness background. I think that's, shapes us still.
Yep.
The attitude, behavior, and character of Jesus, that's one of our statements, the way of Jesus, and we would push that pretty big. And so character would be huge, godliness, purity of life, victorious living. But I've mentioned to people, I've done teaching some workshops on disciple making, and with in a local church, right? So I'm there in the local context, and then the look on people's faces, pastors sometimes included, when you talk about like Jesus laid out a strategy. He laid out what the methods are. He laid out that this is what we are to do, and we're to do what he did. And then there's this unbelief. Well, I can't do what Jesus did. And we're not, again, I have to clarify. We're not talking about you don't have to die on the cross for anybody. I mean, that's
Yep.
right. So there's things, but his disciple-making lifestyle is what we are to imitate.
Yep.
And so again, I think they sort of lost some traction, or maybe for me, I'm just getting more clarity myself to even own that.
Yep.
And then trying to be competent myself, right? So
So I'm doing very similar things. So like I mentioned, I'm using national resources, like they have a video on divine healing, because that's a part of our DNA from the early onset. We don't really live into it much today, but it is part of our DNA. And so I know that is very weak across our movement. And so I'm using that video to be able to provoke a conversation and then talk about divine healing. That's our language. The miraculous, supernatural would be language I would use more readily. But I think that has been helpful, where people are walking through exactly the kairos, Claren, that you're stating. Like, wow, I don't even think like this. Wow, why do we do church the way that we do this? And so right now with that group of pastors, we're actually finding areas where Jesus lived into, so we're using covenant and kingdom language, where he lived into his identity and behaved very naturally out of it in obedience. And we're looking for kind of like identity-oriented terms that are very different than the ones we live into. So here's an example. Luke chapter 4, all that Jesus does when, he reads Isaiah, and he says, the year of the Lord's favor is here, and sight to the blind and captives being set free. We're using language that Jesus was an abolitionist. And do we do the work of abolitionists? And so when you really go back and look at that text and then read through Luke, this is what I'm kind of personally deeply studying through. It's crazy. Luke, that's what Jesus does. You know, by the time John questions, like, hey, are you really the Messiah? He sends the disciples. Jesus basically refers back to that Luke 4 text, and he talks about all the abolitionist work that he's doing. And so we're just wrapping our heads around like, whoa, Jesus did things very differently than we tend to think of. That's not in my job description or anything that I would expect. And the other one, we're really trying to dig into the rabbi concept, because I'm noticing that one of the reasons why my pastors don't even think that they have a responsibility to reproduce into other people is that there's this big separation between them as pastor shepherds and CEOs of nonprofits and being a rabbi.
Right.
And Jesus knew he was a rabbi, and rabbis had disciples. So those are two current identity things that pieces we're really looking into, and then really trying to question, how do we even consider what we do and why we do it? So.
Yeah, that's good. I found it helpful to study what a first century Jewish rabbi
Absolutely
did, how they functioned. That was helpful in my understanding in disciple making.
And I think one of the big parts is that because COVID is throwing everything into question with why do we do what we do, it does feel like we're approaching a lot of that blank slate with, well, what would it look like for me to pivot now and to actually make some radical changes in how I do ministry?
What are you saying there, John?
Yep, I see the behavior stuff there. And behavior, yeah, you're right. When I was typing the D, I was thinking that could be the actions that Jesus did. I didn't know how you guys spoke into it. So maybe it's just, hey, we're recognizing we've communicated about B, behavior, but it's always flowed out of a character-oriented side. We really want to talk about what are the behaviors that Jesus actually did.
Yeah. Yeah, I certainly do that when I talk about.
We wouldn't have listed healing, for example, under behavior.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I agree with you, Michael, that we could do more with that.
Yeah. Yeah, and then again, you know, I'm studying Luke, and so then I go back to Luke and I look at Jesus, the abolitionist, that's language I'm using, and the rabbi. What does the abolitionist rabbi do? Well, by the time he gets to Luke 9 and Luke 10, he's training them to do exactly what he's been doing. And he has the expectation, you've been with me long enough, D1 and D2, now I want you to go do it on your own and then come back and report to me. And it's just, again, like, wow, Jesus thought so radically different than most of us as pastors leading churches tend to think. And so how do we adopt more of that character and skills that Jesus walked in? And how do we shape our ministry so that they look a lot more like his? All right, I see down in the bottom right, I see that use breakthroughs to help with the battles and frustrations. That's great. Support family on mission in broader groups. Good. Anything?
Yeah, that was from, you know, the leaders just giving feedback to us. So that's their feedback.
Anything else on this before we look at the priorities? All right, let's do it. Let's look at the priorities.
So John, do you want to lead us through this?
I can try. I think when we were thinking about stop start, Michael, actually in many ways we feel like it's more about momentum and continuing, pressing into things. So we were struggling with completely stopping or completely starting because we didn't want to innovate. So that's why I think this talks about continuing with our goal to be discipled as RMs. These are particular RM goals. And that we actually realize we're going to have to shift from 3DM focus to some other huddles that we're always going to be in. And we have talked about expanding that huddle to include regional minister assistants or apprentices with us. And basically we would like as RMs to keep moving from L3 to L4 so that we think you can help us, but we think other disciple makers could help us on specific seasons.
Yeah.
So we're just committed to continue to huddle by example, but know we need people to help us move around the square.
Good, I love it.
So the question was, who can help us move around the square Like, for example, if missional community is something we're really weak on, then we need someone who lives it and does it all the time to spend 6 months with us.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Should I keep going, or
No,
you want to comment along the way?
what other areas, I get it because I saw that on the list. What other areas would there be that are like in your guys' mind that would be specific coaching?
We did talk about this. I'm trying to remember. Actually, what happened too is we thought of different mentors around us and thought, oh, it'd be great to spend time with Murray, for example.
Good.
And because he would bring this to the table.
Yeah.
Or great to spend time with this person. Someone even, I don't know, Nathaniel always said, maybe just 6 months with Bob would be really stimulating.
Yep, that'd be great.
You know, so Clarence was all worried that you wouldn't take it personally. But I'm hopeful that you're good because we love you.
Oh, absolutely.
But we recognize that this rhythm could be moved along, or we need to tell you what our focus is.
Yep, absolutely.
Is that okay, Clarence? We all right?
I'm all right.
Why did Michael sign off? What happened?
No.
He left.
The second one was we obviously want to continue to huddle, but we want to get a stronger rhythm of huddling, because if Lynn were on the call, he would huddle his life away. He would start in an infinite number of huddles.
Yeah.
And I think we're all figuring out that and the issue of multiplying huddles.
Yeah.
So we think we have first generation, what do we call them, Brian? Second generation, or different ones of huddles. We're coaching some we're huddling. And so that's what this is all about, to realize if this is all built around just RMs, we're not enough. We need to move to the next stage.
Correct. Yep. And I think in that one, and I'm looking at define the win, some new huddles, next stage huddles, multiplied. I would make sure to include in there that whole next generation concept. So you guys have taken some ground, but I would make sure that, so in year one, I only had lead pastors in my year one huddles in the very beginning. And then once I had that ground gained, then for my second iteration of year one huddles, I invited others who had already been built. You know, for me, it was relatively new, so I was building a relationship with them. But opening it up for that second, third, fourth tier, and even people that aren't in paid roles. I think what I've noticed is that I've got to have a good working relationship with a pastor who trusts me and wants me to make that investment into people in his church. But in that sense, I would be willing to huddle, as much as I'm able to and have the capacity for anybody that's on the next gen radar for even my pastors. And so it feels like it's then kind of in a baseball analogy, it's the, the farm team system. And I'm actually noticing some really good growth there.
Good.
So
I would say number 4 actually is 2A or 2B, because we want to continue and or pursue or start neighbor huddles.
Yeah.
That is this whole idea that we're living into family on mission, and we're doing something. So to me, that would be another type of huddle we want to continue or start, because as Clarence has really beat the drum importantly for us, we need organic neighbors, people coming to faith and walking. I think in this new paradigm, we're stretching beyond just leaders as our focus.
Great.
That's what the Lord is saying, and probably has been saying.
Yep. I really like it. Yeah, again, that could be specific relationships that are directly around you in your neighborhood. And I know you guys are part of local churches too.
Local church ones too.
Serving there, and there are new young believers that you're investing in, but they came into the pipeline through the church. I think both of those are realistic, and the benefit is that you're just, you've got living examples of people in the early stages of faith development that you're investing in, and you need those stories to be able to tell your pastors and other leaders.
And then number 3 is more strategic for us, and that is we resonated with the 5 V's, and we acknowledge that we need more work on valuations, and some other things, because even when we were doing our annual reports, it's measuring church growth stuff,
Good.
not other valuations that matter.
Yeah.
And what was it? This fifth immersion listed the 3 components of a red hot center of a movement.
That's right. Yeah.
And that led us to these 3 things as being somewhat of a tool or matrix for helping us a bit with evaluation and valuations and so on. So that we're changing the database and we're changing our reports. So I think the scorecard we're messing with right now, I guess, if I could use it that way.
That's good. I don't remember the upward iteration of the Red Hot Center. Do you remember? Passionate spirituality?
Passionate spirituality, yep.
Radical community.
Radical community and missionary zeal or mission zeal.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Yep.
We talked about taking those and maybe making them more our language if they didn't work.
Yeah.
But it does give us a good thing to measure churches actually against.
Yeah. Yep, that's great. I love it.
That's what I offer.
Is there
And
any
number 5 isn't conceived yet.
Okay. Is there anything that feels like it's missing? And I'm not trying to state that there has to be the 5th one, but is there anything that comes to mind individually? What I like about this is I'm looking at all 4 of them together. I like that, I just love that number 1 is there because I think that's critical to be able to have an ongoing intentional plan. I think exactly what you're doing. Let's dig into our network of resources and mentors. That's exactly what you need to be doing. Build those relationships. You know, and again, Bob would be able to understand and come in and huddle if he were a guy you turn to, but somebody else might not be able to do so. You know, they might not come in and go, yeah, I'll huddle you, but you could use just very different language. Can you teach us about blank? And would it be possible that we could do that maybe for the next 3 to even 6 months where we meet with you on a weekly basis and you kind of just help us break that down? We know you do this and we want to learn how to do it a little bit better. What I've noticed is if somebody doesn't know how to be a mentor technically, I've got to like almost pull that stuff out of them. And it's just that reverse engineering strategy of like helping them by asking questions. When you take somebody who's skilled at something and you ask them the questions, even the somewhat dumb ones, what you get is you get gold out of that person. And you learn about like, well, what did you do? How did you fail? How did you get to that point? All of that could be really, really helpful. So that is critical. I think that's really important. But I really like that 2, and like you said, John, 2.2 are on there. Because as regional ministers, you know, you're not necessarily in the local church. And so it looks different as a regional minister from a local church leader. And I think you're absolutely right. Number 2 is how you're going to span across the denomination further and further, and you're going to reach further into the pool of leaders that are there. And you're going to get better at your skills while you do all of that. But then I think I love number 4 because you're pushing into the area that would be easy to avoid. You know, your work is regional and not necessarily always local. And so you're doing a really hard thing, but for a really good reason, because we've got to have living examples of doing this stuff because we need to model what we expect people to walk into. So I think that package of 1, 2, and 4 is brilliant and beautiful and really, really helpful. And then I think number 3, especially when I hear it from a scorecard valuation angle, I think that's, again, that's the type of stuff that regional ministers need to think about. And you're talking about some pretty radical shifts of the way things were reported before and the way things would get reported moving forward. I think that's the hard work that RMs need to do. And it's incredibly important because if you can get that into the stream where it's happening at your annual business meetings or your quarterly meetings, and these are reported, what you measure and what you celebrate is what people end up doing. And I think that's going to be refreshing for people to see and to hear something different than just, you know, numbers of people and numbers of dollars.
Yeah, it came up a little bit in the conversation around values. Like if we want to value multiplication, but we just recognize we put it in one of the categories where we don't value it, it's like, well, how are we going to raise the bar for them to think multiplication? These are, the scorecard may help, but we need to live it for sure. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing because as a denomination, I would have said we were high in multiplication when we had a church planting paradigm.
Okay.
I would have said people say we were constant about that, but then when we said we don't plant churches anymore, actually the whole multiplication piece went away.
Really?
I don't know, maybe I'm Clarence, I don't know, Brian, I'm not sure, but something happened that they don't think multiplication.
Interesting.
Well, we were saying disciples make disciples, leaders multiply leaders, and churches replicate churches, right? So, but when we stopped the denominational push to do denominational planting churches, the local, the mother-daughter approach and the missional community kind of outreach approach, we're not there. It just haven't got there yet, and we lost it, John, somehow. Like
Michael in COVID, if I just jump Michael in COVID, what I've noticed is only 2 churches I'm aware of all of our churches that thought about going smaller rather than going online and other things. So again, it reminds me, we don't think multiplication.
Yeah.
We don't think small is big, all those kinds of things. So interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would add that what we thought would happen when we're multiplying disciples, and it's a long-term thing, but the multiplication got lost. By the way, we weren't really planting churches, even though we thought we were.
Explain that. I'm curious.
Hey, Michael, before we go, you should know, we got news last week, and all of us, that Kervin is no longer employed by the EMCC. I don't know if you heard that, but so some of this, as you say, what's number 5? Well, number 5 is making it through this next year with some things, and John has been assigned as interim president.
Great.
For this time, and so you should know that you're still journeying with us, and that's a part of our journey.
Yeah, there is going to be a transition through there. My assumption would be that it's going to be a relatively smooth transition for you guys, at least into that next year or next term, whenever that plays. I don't know the time frames. Am I right in that assumption, or does it feel like it's a bigger hurdle for you guys?
If John stays the way he is, but if this goes to his head, I don't know what it'll be like, but so far it's so good, and I anticipate it continuing the same way. So the denomination is using Dr. John, Reverend Dr. John Cressman, so we're a little concerned that this might,
Is that an honorary doctorate that they're bestowing, or did he actually earn that?
Oh, he is. That's really a true earned degree. Yeah.
Awesome. I think what will be nice, there's going to be some changes inevitably. I would imagine there's going to be some changes to John's role and responsibility further. I don't know how you guys will do that, but I think you guys will benefit. You guys have a lot of time with one another, a lot of trust, equity with one another, but inevitably you're going to hit some rough patches where, I'm not trying to say that John's going to behave differently. There are going to be some areas where things will have to change to some degree. But I think because you guys have all of that trust equity, I would imagine, my guess would be, that would be I want to say easy. It will be an easier thing to navigate as long as you guys continue to speak the truth and love to one another. So I would imagine this is actually going to be a really good turning point for you guys, really. Because I think some of the instability of the last few months is going to be at least resolved for this next season. There'll be some forward traction that way.
I think you're right. Yeah. John the other day was, he's got so much understanding of us at our work as a regional minister, that yeah, he fully understands that and how that works. And so I feel that's a huge part.
Yep, absolutely. I think too, something that I wrestled with, you know, I made that move from being a team member at a local church to being the senior leader. So it's very different, but still, you know, I was once a part of the team, contributing alongside shoulder to shoulder, and now I'm the lead. I'm sure you guys have been in spots like that or watched other leaders, but Bob really challenged me in that time frame, because we were going through our immersion, and he said, "Are you leading?" And I'm like, "I'm not leading them. Are you leading a huddle with your team?" "No, I'm not doing it yet. I feel really awkward." And you know, again, I was much younger than like where you guys are. There were all of those types of things, but there were those adjustments that needed to be made. There were internal adjustments that I had to wrestle with, because I saw these as my equals and my friends. And I didn't necessarily want to compromise that, but I also knew there was a sense of authority and responsibility that I had to walk in. And I'm thankful for the graciousness of my friends at that time. They really allowed and empowered me to be able to lead. And, you know, and yet I wasn't trying to dictate. And so it was a, you know, when I look back on that season fondly, even though it was really awkward in the beginning and difficult to wrestle with, I'd imagine with all of your guys' experience, that's going to be an easier transition than the one I went through. But still, nonetheless, those are going to be factors that you guys are going to wrestle with. I think the open dialogue will be really helpful. Great.
Good feedback.
Okay, well, we'll be back on next week for the plan for working through multiplying missional leaders. And so I believe that there's a content huddle, if I'm remembering correctly, that we'll step into there. So that'll mean some new reading, and then we'll continue to work through there. I think that, again, even with this huddle, I think we're moving into like late November or early December. I think if I'm remembering correctly, I haven't had a conversation with Bob in the last little bit, but Bob is kind of under the impression that because of all the changes everybody has gone through, other huddle groups like yours are expected to continue to lead all the way until the middle of October. But I need to circle back with him and just let him know that, you know, even if I don't get paid for that, like November and December timeframe, I'm intending to lead all the way through that book. I want to take you guys all the way through that missional, the MML book. And then from that point, be able to make that transition and wrap things up. So just to give you guys a heads up on what I'm expecting to do. I don't know if there was any communication about that to you guys, but that's some of the latest stuff that I've heard from Bob. So I'll circle back on that with him.
Sounds good.
All right, friends.
Very good.
Okay,
Thank you.
bless you. Take care.